Karen's sneer could curdle milk, and her sister's cackle wasn't far behind. They stood in my backyard, shovels in hand, turning my garden into a war zone like it was their God-given right. I'd spent 3 years nurturing that garden. Every tomato plant, every rose bush, every stubborn carrot that defied the rocky soil was a labor of love. It wasn't just dirt and plants, it was my therapy, my pride, my escape from a world that often felt too heavy. When I moved into this quiet suburban neighborhood, I thought I'd found peace. Then I met Karen and her sister, Diane, the self-appointed queens of the HOA who decided my garden was an eyesore that violated their precious community aesthetic. It started innocently enough. A note slipped under my door, written in Karen's looping, sanctimonious scrawl. Your garden does not comply with HOA standards. Remove it by Friday, or we will. I laughed it off at first. My garden was tucked behind a low fence, barely visible from the street. It wasn't harming anyone. But Karen didn't see it that way. To her, my rows of sunflowers and zucchini were a personal affront, a rebellion against her iron-fisted rule over the neighborhood's manicured lawns. I ignored the note. Big mistake. By Wednesday, Karen was at my doorstep, her bulk filling the frame, her pinched face radiating disdain. Diane hovered behind her, nodding like a bobblehead, her arms crossed as if she were guarding the gates of HOA heaven. This isn't personal, Karen said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sweetness that makes your skin crawl. But your jungle is lowering property values. Fix it, or we'll handle it ourselves. I tried to reason with her, explaining how much the garden meant to me, how it was within my property line, how their rules didn't even apply. But Karen just scoffed, her chins wobbling as she turned away. You'll regret this, she muttered, and Diane's smirk told me they meant business. Friday morning, I woke to the sound of metal striking earth. My heart sank as I ran to the window. There they were, Karen and Diane, tearing through my garden like a pair of human bulldozers. Karen swung her shovel with glee, uprooting my sunflowers, their golden petals scattering like confetti at a funeral. Diane stomped on my tomato plants, laughing as the ripe fruit burst under her boots. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and started recording through the window. That's when I remembered the surveillance camera I'd installed last summer after a string of package thefts. It was tucked in the oak tree, small and discreet, with a perfect view of the carnage. I stormed outside, my voice cracking with rage. What the hell are you doing? Karen didn't even flinch. She leaned on her shovel, her sweaty face smug as ever. We warned you, she said. This is for the good of the neighborhood. Diane chimed in, her voice sharp and mocking. Maybe next time you'll follow the rules. I was shaking, not just with anger, but with the sting of violation. This wasn't just about plants, it was about power, about their need to control everything and everyone. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. Instead, I pointed to the camera in the tree. You're on video, I said quietly. Both of you. Their faces froze. Karen's smugness faltered, and Diane's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. They exchanged a glance, and for a moment, I saw something rare, fear. But Karen recovered quickly, tossing her shovel aside with a theatrical huff. You can't prove anything, she snapped. That camera's probably fake. They stormed off, leaving my garden in ruins and my heart in pieces. I spent the rest of the day salvaging what I could. A few plants were still intact, but most were beyond saving. My hands were caked with dirt, my eyes burning with unshed tears. I wasn't just mourning the garden, I was mourning the idea that I could live somewhere and not be trampled by people like Karen. But as I sifted through the wreckage, I remembered the camera. I pulled the footage, and there it was, crystal clear evidence of Karen and Diane's destruction. Every swing of the shovel, every mocking laugh, every crushed plant. I had them. I called the police. At first, they were skeptical. Vandalism over a garden didn't exactly scream high-priority crime. But when I showed them the footage, their tone changed. This is clear destruction of property, the officer said, his brow furrowing as he watched Karen's shovel rip through my rose bush. We'll handle it. That afternoon, I filed a report, and by evening, 2 officers were at Karen's door. I watched from my porch as they questioned her. Her voice carried across the street, shrill and indignant. "This is outrageous. I'm the HOA president. I was enforcing the rules." Diane, standing behind her, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards. The officers weren't impressed. They explained that HOA rules don't override property rights, and destroying my garden was a crime. Karen's face turned beet red, her protests growing louder until one of the officers mentioned the surveillance footage. That shut her up. They cuffed her, right there in her pristine driveway, her neighbors peeking through curtains as she was led to the patrol car. Diane wasn't arrested. She hadn't done as much of the physical damage, but she slunk away, her bravado gone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Karen's arrest made the local news, a small story tucked between reports of city council meetings and high school football scores. The headline read, "HOA president arrested for vandalizing neighbor's garden." The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some supported Karen, claiming she was just doing her job, but most were fed up with her reign of terror. At the next HOA meeting, she was stripped of her presidency. Diane didn't show up. I pressed charges, and the case was straightforward. The surveillance footage was undeniable, and Karen's defense, something about community standards and miscommunication, fell apart in court. She was found guilty of destruction of property, fined heavily, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my garden. It wasn't enough to replace the years of work I'd lost, but it felt like justice. More than that, it felt like a message. People like Karen don't get to trample over others without consequences. Rebuilding the garden took time. I replanted, starting small with a few herbs and flowers, each one a quiet act of defiance. The neighborhood changed, too. Without Karen's iron grip, the HOA relaxed its rules, and people started to loosen up. A few neighbors even stopped by to offer seeds or help with the replanting. One of them, an older woman who'd lived here for decades, told me she'd always hated Karen's bullying but never had the courage to speak up. "You did us all a favor," she said, handing me a packet of marigold seeds. Karen moved away a few months later. I heard she and Diane bought a condo in a different town, probably terrorizing a new set of neighbors. But I didn't care. My garden was growing again, and so was my sense of peace. The surveillance camera stayed in the tree, a silent guardian. Every time I looked at it, I smiled, knowing it had captured more than just a crime. It had captured the moment someone like Karen finally faced the consequences of her actions. The world is full of Karens, people who think they can steamroll over others because they believe they're right. But sometimes, the little guy wins. Sometimes, a camera in a tree and a stubborn patch of dirt can bring down a tyrant. And that's a story worth planting. The end.